Well, first I will let Jasmina, my coworker Jasmina, introduce me.
There were maybe, never mind. So welcome everyone. Thanks for coming to this talk. Like David said, my name is Jasmina. I work together with David at a company named AOBiome. David is the founding scientist over at AOBiome. AOBiome is a biotech company based in Cambridge, Mass. that is focusing specifically on ammonia oxidizing bacteria and its impact on health. Specifically right now we're looking at skin and inflammatory skin diseases. Ammonia oxidizing bacteria, just as a short snippet to properly hopefully set the stage for what you're going to be hearing from David today, is a type of bacteria that used to exist naturally on our skin many years ago, but we have wiped it out due to changes in our lifestyle as we've evolved as a society, and also a lot of changes in our hygiene habits. We use so many products on a daily basis that definitely has an impact on our microbiome and our skin's ecosystem. And AOBs, as we call them, is a type of bacteria that we've wiped out as a result of a lot of that. And we're studying the effects of putting that bacteria back on. The bacteria do a pretty cool thing. They help to consume your sweat and in turn produce two things, nitrite and nitric oxide. And I bring those things up because nitric oxide is something that David has a lot of interest in. It's a really important signaling molecule for the body and potentially a really important component of our day-to-day health, and actually relates in a really important way to this whole notion of biohacking. So today, David is going to be talking to you about this notion of biohacking from the perspective of control, which is wonderful because this is the first year that DEF CON is having a biohacking village, which you can come visit us at. But he'll be talking a little bit about biohacking from a perspective of control, and of course you'll be hearing plenty about nitric oxide. So with that being said, I'll hand it over to David.
Well, thank you, Jasmina. I want to thank everyone also, Fraser and the other people who put this thing together. I want to, I'll try not to make my talk too, commercially, but also this is not meant to be any kind of a medical type, thing. This is just for information, and, I'll be talking about theory, not the treatment of any specific disease or disorder. I mean, we do have an IND with the FDA, but, until everything gets, all the T's get crossed and dotted stuff, we're not going to talk about medical things. So, here we go. So I'm an engineer, I'm a chemical engineer, and, I see physiology as a chemical plant, a very big, complex, intricately controlled chemical plant. And the most important part of any chemical plant is the control system. If the control system isn't working right, nothing is going to work right. And there are typically two types of faults: good control around a bad set point or bad control around a good set point. What we see in physiology is good control around a bad set point, where you have a set point and you have deviations in one direction. You're too fat, you're too thin, all the deviations are in one direction. They are not deviations around the set point. So good control around a bad set point you can't fix externally. You have to change the set point. So how do you hack anything? Well, you need to know what you want to do, and you need to know how to do it. Problem with physiology is it's really complicated. There are at least, zillions of control parameters per cell, and there are a zillion cells. So how do you do that? Well, very carefully. But knowing that all disorders are disorders of control, and knowing that control has to have certain properties to exist as control, then you can start to understand what you need to do and how to do it. Medicine does not understand the control of physiology. Most medicine is based on the idea of homeostasis, which is not correct. In fact, it's not even wrong. Physiology comprises, many nonlinear coupled systems with coupled parameters with hysteresis. The state at rest is the most complicated state. And it's the state at rest where everything important happens, getting ready to do, whatever it is you need to do when a stress comes along. So, and preparing physiology to respond to the next stress responding state is the most important thing that happens at rest. And of course, that's completely impervious to we're completely oblivious to all of that because it happens in the background. And only when there's more than enough resources to do everything else you want to do. And it's a self-organizing criticality, which is quite important, but won't go into. So what properties does the control of physiology have? Well, the same as the rest of reality. There's no action at distance, and all control is local. Each cell has to be signaled to do whatever each cell is going to do. A lot of that signaling is internal and is the auto-tuning of the cells so that each cell works together with every other cell so that they can, instantiate whatever it is they need to instantiate. And it's that the local self-tuning, auto-tuning of control that allows cells to synchronize their behavior so that ensembles of cells can work together and do things collectively as an organ, so that all the cells in the heart can beat together, so the cells in the brain can work together to instantiate thinking, which we still have no idea how that happens. But we know, a single neuron can't think. You need ensembles of millions of cells, and they have to be all doing, different things, which we do not understand. So to summarize, looking at physiology as a control system, all disorders are disorders of control, and mostly good control around a bad set point, and you need to understand that. And the most important way to regulate that is to let the auto-tuning kind of do its own thing. And if the auto-tuning isn't working, then nothing else is going to work. So, but we're not just human cells. Our microbiome, we have 10 times more cells and 100 times more genes in the microbiome than we do in human cells. So, and those cells also, control themselves and each other and interact with the rest of things. The microbiome is more complex than the rest of physiology put together. And nitric oxide is one of the singularly important, signaling molecules that keeps all of those things in sync. And ammonia oxidizing bacteria are a keystone species because they live on the skin and couple ammonia in sweat into NO and nitrite. And, our hypothesis is that they set the background level, and that's a key, parameter. In the environment, everywhere you find ammonia oxidizing bacteria. That you find ammonia and you find ammonia oxidizing bacteria. They make nitrite, and that gets oxidized to nitrate, and then plants turn that into proteins in cells. And then when those proteins are oxidized, they're deaminated and release ammonia. Major source of ammonia in the environment is the surface of eukaryotes. And not surprisingly, the surface of eukaryotes is a major niche for ammonia oxidizing bacteria. So you can see, these are data I collected. Ammonia produced by nitric oxide produced from ammonia by ammonia oxidizing bacteria on the surface of various eukaryotes. And these are eukaryotes separated by hundreds of millions of years of evolution. It's a common common pathway for many organisms. The most important fact about nitric oxide is that all nitric oxide sensors sense the sum of nitric oxide from all sources, including the background. So if you have So what happens, nitric oxide synthase makes NO, it diffuses a distance and then activates a sensor. Each sensor senses the sum of nitric oxide from every source, including the background. But the background isn't constant. The background is a global control parameter. The physiology moves up and down depending what it's trying to do. And that moving it up and down changes all nitric oxide pathways simultaneously. So it becomes very complicated. And because you've got hundreds or thousands of pathways that are synchronized with a common background that's going up and down, the control problem becomes quite difficult. So how did humans develop this kind of stuff? Well, our ancestors evolved in Africa, and they never bathed. It was too dangerous. Every water source had parasites and crocodiles and alligators and predators and who knows what. So they stayed away from the water. And so living in a tropical place with sweating every day, you're going to have ammonia on your skin, and it would be not possible to not have ammonia oxidizing bacteria living on your skin. It just there's no way to avoid that. And over evolutionary time, our physiology evolved to use that productively to regulate things through non-thermal sweating. And my hypothesis, that's why we have hair, to provide a niche for these bacteria, and why pubic hair is regulated by androgens, because a low nitric oxide state is a high androgen state. And so high androgens, you increase hair growth in various places, and that expands the niche for ammonia oxidizing bacteria. NO levels go up, and the androgen level goes back down. So there's a normal feedback that regulates the niche size of ammonia oxidizing bacteria. And in the wild, the Yanomami tribe is measured to have ammonia oxidizing bacteria on their skin, multiple different strains, and this is a tribe that has never been contacted and doesn't have the Western pathological bathing practices. So the most important part of control is control stability. If you don't have stability, you don't have control. And to get control, you need negative feedback in the control range. So as the stress causes deviations, affects the phenotype has to get stronger so as to resist those stresses in the active range. So the active range. This is where the active range is. This is where the active range is. You have where the slope, the PDS, is positive, whereas you increase the stress, the phenotype gets stronger. And if you exceed that, then things start to go bad, and the first thing that's lost is ability to reproduce, and that is a feature because it avoids wasting resources during a time that's not good for reproduction. And if there are not enough resources to stay alive, there certainly aren't enough resources to try and reproduce. So and these are all just different parameters that are essentially the same thing. They're all proportional to the degree of stress. Okay. So, how did the physiology of life? Well, evolution through common descent, and eventually leading to eukaryotes. All eukaryotes use oxygen for ATP production and for synthesis of amphiphilic molecules for the endomembrane system. Every use of oxygen produces superoxide, produces oxidative stress species. So eukaryotes required oxidative stress responses before they could use oxygen for ATP or for synthesis. And NO and superoxide react at diffusion-limited kinetics, so you can't have both. You can have high NO, low superoxide, or high superoxide, low NO. You can't have both because they react at diffusion-limited kinetics. So this is a kind of a schema of how the fundamental, the first stress response evolved. And what that first stress response had to do was it had to, you have the baseline at rest, the stress happens, then first you have to detect the stress, then trigger the stress response, then block the damage, then repair the damage, and then start to do things to mitigate future damage, turn off the stress response, return to the baseline state, and then do mitosis. And the reason for single-celled organisms, the most important step in a successful stress response is reproduction. If you're a single-cell organism and you don't reproduce after a stress response, that stress response was not successful. So, that's my hypothesis. That is why products of oxidative stress are mitogens and are used to regulate the cell cycle, both to stop reproduction when things are bad, when there aren't enough resources, to slow down and even stop the cell cycle, and then to trigger the cell cycle after everything becomes good enough to reproduce. So that's the archetypal control system that, controlling reproduction for single cell organisms. There's nothing more important. So with oxidative stress being that fundamental thing, it's not something, it's too important to be set by things like diet. And all the large placebo-controlled clinical trials of supplemental antioxidants show essentially no effect on states of oxidative stress. That oxidative stress is too important to be set by diet. It's set by the oxidative stress control systems. And so, diet is just not important in that. So here are a few of the Enno pathways that are important, and you have superoxide and NO. NO reacts with superoxide and radicals at diffusion-limited kinetics, with SGC to make cyclic GMP. This is down in the sub-nanomolar range. All the heme enzymes are regulated by NO. All thiols, and there are a zillion thiols. So how do you hack the background level of nitric oxide? Well, there are 4 generally recognized ways. Eat a lot of green leafy vegetables because of the nitrate content they have, and that's well absorbed and goes on the tongue and is reduced to nitrite, and it is well recognized to be an important health benefit. Aerobic exercise, the shear on the blood generates NO and also bone strain. Mindfulness meditation raises the nitric oxide through neurogenic production of NO, and then AOB on the skin, turn ammonia and sweat into NO and nitrite. Okay, so the fundamental stress response is to divert resources to survival, and it's all resources, especially ATP. And ATP is energy to do work, and NO is more like the control signal that regulates the allocation of that. And under fight or flight, you turn off healing to free up ATP to get a few more steps running from the bear. And that's why stress causes adverse health effects, because physiology is diverting ATP away from healing into immediate consumption. So the hierarchy of substrate allocation, survival is number 1, and then repair damage, anticipate future needs, and then reproduce. And the plasticity response, that's where muscle hypertrophy gets after exercise. It's not the damage during the exercise that's important, it's the repair and plasticity afterward. Okay, so how to hack physiology from a control perspective. That, everything that affects physiology is coupled, and, stress makes everything worse because control needs ATP to mitigate all bad things. And so you don't have the resources to mitigate bad things, then you can't, and you're SOL. So the way to do it is you have to let the auto-tuning do its own thing. The cell-to-cell communication that, regulates, myriad things that each cell does. And so the kind of 4 fundamental things that you need to do is, be kind to everyone, be nice to everyone, do no harm, do well by doing good, keep your microbiome healthy, eat food, mostly plants, not too much, and then get the right amount of exercise and, rest and sleep and, all these other things, and all to maintain a low stress state so that your normal repair and things can do their thing and repair and keep everything ready so that if a bear comes in the back door, you can turn it on and run faster than everyone else. Okay, so here are some examples, which I probably only have time to go through a few of them. Adverse effects of stress that are, systemic, but they're hard to deal with because there are no treatments for these things, and because they really are, bad control, and it's, disorders of control, and it's, good control around a bad set point, and you need to shift the set point. So, post-traumatic stress disorder. My hypothesis, it's a feature that physiology invokes if you're living in a war zone. If you're living in a war zone, what's the ideal phenotype? Well, hypervigilance, insomnia, hair trigger anger, kill everyone before they can kill you. I mean, that's obvious. That's what, and if you're living in a war zone, that's what you want. Well, living in a war zone, that's what your background physiology is going to self-modify it to do. But, that's a problem if you're trying to, live back in civilian life where you're not in a war zone. And the only way to get out of it is to have auto-tuning, tune its way out. And that's, not being in a war zone and, letting auto-tuning do its thing. Depression. My hypothesis, depression is a feature. When you're running from a bear, physiology will invoke euphoria, the euphoria of the near-death metabolic stress. And you need to have euphoria when you're running from a bear so you can keep on running when your muscles start to necrose because they're not getting enough blood. And so physiology induces euphoria so you can run while your muscles are dying. And all the safeties are turned off. So you don't feel pain, you don't feel fatigue. I mean, you experience fatigue, but the feeling of fatigue has been turned off by physiology so you can keep running because if the bear catches you, you're dead. So running and just damaging your muscles is a feature. If organisms could enter euphoria easily, they would, and they would die. That euphoria is the same euphoria of autoerotic asphyxiation, of the runner's high, the solvent huffing, the going toward the light when you're drowning, and the stimulant drugs of abuse. They lower the ATP level, trigger this metabolic, euphoric near-death state, and changes all of your priorities so that you don't care if you're dying because if the bear is chasing you, that's what you have to get rid of. So evolution has minimized the sum of deaths due to being caught by the bear, dropping dead from exhaustion, and suicide. And depression has to be aversive enough to cause suicide because it's protecting you from the euphoric state where you would gladly kill yourself by running yourself to death. So to minimize the sum, you need some in each category. So you need some suicide, some running yourself to death, and some from being caught. So developmental origin of adult hypertension. In rats, in utero, exposing them to low nitric oxide programs a hypertensive state in the adult. So it's the low NO auto programs, the auto tunes the pathways to be in a high stress state. How do you get rid of that? Well, the same. You have to be in a low stress state and allow the auto tuning to resolve that. Calhoun's mice. What happens when you take 8 mice and give them unlimited food, water, space, or not space, etc., in a confined space? Well, the population goes up pretty high, and then it drops down to 0. The population becomes extinct, but with no apparent disease or apparent cause of death. The mice died of old age, but they died of old age without reproducing. And my hypothesis is that just the psychosocial stress of conspecific organisms competing with each other moved the operating point of reproduction beyond an adaptive set point, so they couldn't reproduce. And I'm just about out of time, but what? Wait, I have what? 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 Wait. The next speaker canceled. Why didn't someone tell me that? I would have gone a little bit slower. But and I would have put in more slides. Okay. So Calhoun's, this is the cause of death was old age, that the mice died without reproducing, but there were no substrate limits, there were no diseases, it's clear to me that this has to be a auto tuning and auto programming of stress beyond an adaptive threshold, where control diverts substrates to where they cannot be used for reproduction, and it doesn't matter if they're there if control can't use them. Okay, this data is human, the male-female ratio at birth, and over the last 70, 80 years. And what's very interesting is that the ratio depends on ethnicity, where the ratio in blacks is lower and going up. The ratio in whites is higher but going down, and there's no explanation for that in terms of endocrine disruption, because blacks and whites are too similar. They have the same endocrine systems. They're living in the same environment, eating the same food, eating the same. So there needs to be an environmental influence that is differentially affecting blacks versus white, and to me, that's racism. Back during the Jim Crow South, before the 1960s, it was real low, and from an evolutionary standpoint, under conditions of very high stress, many organisms shift the ratio of males to females to a fewer males, more females. And the reason this happens is that for humans, humans are descended from more females than males because many more males die without reproducing than females. I mean, the average number of males, for every offspring you need one male and one female, but many males don't reproduce. And so if there's lots of conspecific stress between competition over mates, then it would favor having more female descendants than male descendants. And so that's what we see. And, interesting, during the 1960s in the civil rights and Martin Luther King, it increased, and the ratio increased a lot. And, but has been increasing ever since. I attribute this to the reduction in racism that's gone on since the 1970s. We're still not there yet, and the decline in whites, I'd say that's probably the increased misogyny and increased stress that modern living is causing on us, on everyone. Okay, so why are there so few women here? Well, we know why, because of misogyny. And, putting people under stress, triggers, fight or flight, triggers resources away from repair and healing and, maintaining good health. And hurts, especially hurts the people being bullied, but it also hurts the bully themselves. And what this tells me is that the modern misogyny is beyond the peak, the DPDS peak, and so where it is having adverse effects, that an increase is not making the phenotype more robust, it's making the phenotype less robust, and so it's actually causing harm to people in the environment. So here's a graph of puberty in humans, and back in 1850, here it was almost 17, and now it's much lower than this. It's down 10, 11, 12. So what's the cause? And the chemical industry only started being important back in the 1940s, so it's very likely not due to xenobiotic chemicals causing endocrine disruption. I mean, my hypothesis is that a lot of it is is just conspecific stress. Being stress on women, stress just being in a stressful environment because there are more people that can be mean and bad to you, and early puberty is not benign. It does associate with lots of other endocrine disorder type things: polycystic ovarian syndrome, infertility, asthma, diabetes. So again, the shift of control is being hammered beyond an adaptive threshold, where the phenotype is becoming less robust. So how does a bully know that the bullying is effective? Well, the bully can vicariously feel the pain of the victim. The way the bully does that is through the same neuroanatomy that is used to detect your own pain, and it detects the crosstalk if you feel vicarious pain, that also triggers fight or flight in you to prepare you for whatever, is causing pain in your environment. So, bullying hurts the bully as well as the victim. And so, that's, that if you want to hack your physiology, you hack it by, being nice to everyone. If you look at a map of heart disease deaths, where are they most prevalent? Well, down in the South. Well, why is that? Well, where is racism the worst? Well, down in the South. So, is that correlation or causation? Well, we don't know, but all the physiology points to it being causation, and that being a racist asshole is not good for you. So, and the same place, that all the same-sex marriage had the same kind of things. So how to hack physiology from the perspective of control? Well, you need to let auto-tuning do its thing, and you have to, be nice to everyone, do well by doing good, keep your microbiome healthy, eat food, not too much, mostly plants, get the right amount of exercise, and then you let your auto-tuning do its thing. Any questions? Diet, most of those things are too important to be controlled by diet. And there are really, the way diet studies are done, they're all self-selected diets. And you can't impose a diet on someone because they won't stick to it. And so I think most of these things are too important to be set by diet, and diet, food choice is part of the control system by which you control your intake of antioxidants. And if you're in a high oxidative stress state, you don't want antioxidants because physiology has to generate more free radicals to get rid of them. So, no, I'm quite sure it's not diet. Yeah, you can make things bad with diet, but these are people not trying to kill themselves with diet. They're, so, anyway. Okay, yes?
Along those same lines, it's not just diet, but it's also obesity, which in fat itself hormones.
Yes. However, yes, I agree with that. However, what's the mechanism by which that fat happens? My hypothesis, it's triggering fight or flight, and when you trigger fight or flight, you shift metabolic load of muscle to carbohydrate, and because you're trying to maximize ATP production in muscle, so that you can take a couple more steps from the bear. The way muscles do that is they do glycolysis in muscle and export lactate, and then the lactate gets consumed elsewhere, like the brain, or gets converted into fat. So muscles can store glucose as glycogen. It can rapidly metabolize that into pyruvate and lactate, export the lactate, and then, but if there's no place to get rid of the lactate, it gets turned into fat. But then you have a carbohydrate craving to replenish the carbohydrate that was stored in the muscle as glycogen. So, you get this ratchet, you do some kind of exercise, you make lactate, you turn the lactate into fat, and then you can't turn the fat back into glucose. So you have to replenish the glucose by consuming carbohydrate. So, That's my, yeah, yes? What? That is not correct. That is not correct. Homeostasis says yes, it's regulated in a narrow range. That is not correct. The ATP is used by hundreds of thousands of different pathways. The only way a zillion pathways can use one signaling molecule is if that signaling molecule is actually regulating all of those different pathways. Each cell regulates its own ATP level, yes. I'm not hearing what you're saying. This one? The ATP set point is regulated in part by nitric oxide. Nitric oxide and guanylyl cyclase co-regulate. Nitric oxide and ATP co-regulate guanylyl cyclase to change the activation so that a low NO level also corresponds with an ATP level. So ATP and NO go up and down in sync. Well, the ATP, there are two sources of ATP. There's through the oxidative phosphorylation in mitochondria, which requires oxygen, and then there's glycolysis, which is independent of oxygen. And muscles do both simultaneously. They do glycolysis and make lactate, and they also oxidize as much as they have mitochondria to oxidize. And they try to make as much ATP as they can, and allowing the differential release of lactate kind of allows each cell to make as much ATP as it can, and then the rest of physiology deals with the lactate. And so when you're running from a bear, you can run until your muscles necrose, and until the cells die. And what that says is that ATP, when muscles are dying, is at the lowest point that it can reach. And muscles will let you do that because muscle cells dying is a feature. There's nothing else that they can do, and so you're not saving any ATP for anything else. Redundancy is not the right word. When you're running from a bear, there are no redundancies. The physiology it diverts all resources to survival, and will kill you if there aren't enough resources. That's you can run yourself to death. When you're in the runner's high, there isn't some emergency power source that comes on. What's happening is that essential systems are being turned off, but they're being turned off in a gradual hierarchy because you don't have enough ATP to power them. And so, you can turn healing off. You can hold your breath for a minute. You can't hold it for 10 minutes. But if you had to go through a zero oxygen atmosphere, you could hold your breath. Well, it's the same thing with ATP. There's a cell state called ischemic preconditioning, where cells change their physiology such that they produce and consume much less ATP, and they are then resistant to ischemia during the period of ischemic preconditioning. And that's every cell exhibits that kind of behavior, and it's a very complicated state because there are, a zillion pathways that are modulated up and down, and, and we don't fully understand it. But it is a very robust thing. You subject a heart to a few episodes of brief ischemia, then it becomes much, much more resistant to ischemia for the next, 24 hours or so. And there's some background physiology thing that's going on, but that ischemic preconditioned state cannot be permanent. If it could be permanent, cells would enter that, permanently, and have more ATP to devote to reproduction. So they don't do that. So there has to be some long-term cost to ischemic preconditioning. Okay. Yes. Well, I mean, the only reason a chemical has an effect on physiology is if it interferes with the control system of physiology. If the chemical didn't interfere with the control system, it would have no effects. And the decline in the age of puberty, that started occurring much earlier than the synthetic chemical industry. I mean, the synthetic chemical industry didn't really start until the 1940s, and 50 years earlier, the decline in age of puberty was already very well underway. And I mean, it's multifactorial, and but we know it's stress responses integrate all of the environmental effects together. Because stress physiology has to integrate everything together in order to mobilize all resources to deal with whatever stress is going on. So, any more questions? Yes. Yes. Well, our hypothesis is that AOBs on the skin, regulate the background level of nitric oxide. And if, nitric oxide is the main regulator of when you're in fight or flight and when you're at rest, shifting the set point of that will, move you more into a, fight or flight, all the time, and decrease the fraction of resources devoted to repair and maintenance of physiology. And so it will tend to shorten your life and make you and act like the way chronic stress.
So I'll also pipe in here just talking about the skin as like a very basic example, because that's about as far as we are when it comes to the science. Ammonia oxidizing bacteria, from everything that we understand and also some of the studies that have come from Aboriginal tribes, they seem to serve the role of like a peacekeeper for the skin. So not just their presence alone that's really helpful, but it's actually the fact that they have a pretty dramatic impact on the rest of the microbial community on the skin as a whole. And the thing about removing the peacekeeper is that it kind of crumbles as an ecosystem. And what it seems like is happening is that losing the peacekeeper allows the bad guys to kind of take over a little bit more, or at least leave the skin a little bit more susceptible to potential problems. And we've potentially made that even more dramatic with incredibly pervasive uses of everything from antibiotics and, of course, antibacterial everything, and the fact that even that so many products of ours have preservatives in them, which are effectively antibacterial. So when you think about consistently applying these products every single day, multiple times a day for some people, think about what you're doing to that microbial community. And I'll add to that by saying that, unfortunately, the bad guys grow back faster. So bad bacteria that are pathogenic have those really quick doubling times, whereas the good bacteria like AOBs take 10 to 12 hours to grow back. So you're removing the good guys and the bad guys are growing back faster, just leaving your skin more susceptible to something serious like infections or something less serious like, some inflammatory disorders or even just basic crazy uncomfortable skin dryness or oiliness or something along those lines. Yeah.
Would you say that, is it as simple as bad guys and good guys, or is it imbalance?
That's a good question. Yep.
Well, it's very complicated, and we don't know the answer to that. I mean, who's a good guy and who's a bad guy probably changes over time, and depending, what's going on in your environment and your health and lots of other things. So, but I think the AOBs are a keystone species. They're the only type of bacteria that convert ammonia into NO and nitrite, and they're the only bacteria that derive energy by doing that. So they're there are other bacteria that can reduce nitrate in sweat into NO and nitrite, but ammonia levels in sweat are 1,000 times higher than nitrate levels. So there's a much larger pool of ammonia to convert into NO and nitrite. And my hypothesis, one of the first things you do when you go into shock is you have profuse sweating. And the question is, well, why? I mean, it's you're going into shock. Why would you release water? I mean, you want to keep that to keep your blood But my hypothesis is to generate nitrite to in your hour of need to block all the hemes and prevent reperfusion injury. Yeah.
Have there been any controlled experiments with, let's say, how AOBs exist on the skin? Is it, the introduction of water, the cleaning ritual, is it the product that you use that takes care of it? Or is that something that doesn't know?
Well, we're still doing research in that area. I mean, I've been working on this for maybe 10, 15 years, and been doing my science experiment. I stopped bathing, I put the bacteria on, stopped bathing, and kind of see what would happen. And was surprised when things did happen, and went to the literature and found out, that pathway is related to nitric oxide. And
Do you have plans to do any experiments to bring that to a larger control group?
wait, what? Could you repeat that?
Do you have plans of extending that experiment to a larger control group?
Yes, we do. It's we're a startup. We're trying to bootstrap our way up to from just me to the whole world. I mean, I would like to see 1 billion people a day use this, but that's anyway. Out of time. Okay.